I said breathe! Hello everyone, this is Dakota Frandsen and welcome to a new episode of Specialist of the Strange Radio Show. Today is... what fucking day is it today? January 17th. How could I forget that? Doolittle and Bad Boys 2 hits theaters today. I kind of want to see both of them. But that's not what we're here to talk about. No. Oh, no. Today, we are going to discuss a bit of a personal topic for most people. We're going to discuss mental health. It's an uncomfortable conversation, but it is one that needs to be had. Specifically, mental health and the paranormal. While some of you may automatically assume, why is this not wanting to work? That I'm going to start trash talking all paranormal incidents as someone who is mentally ill, and a lot of the stigma around it, therefore makes you think that, oh, I'm just going to say you're all nothing but crazy people and this thing isn't real. Hell no. Anybody who actually knows my story knows that I cannot fairly make that claim. Granted, I fully admit that I might have something wrong with me, but so far nothing's been found. But let's get into the discussion, shall we? Now, the reason why this needs to be discussed is not just because of, how should I put this? It's not just because of indiscretions that some people may have, and not taking into consideration what might actually be going on when something strange goes down. Though that is part of it. A lot of the time, mental health incidents have been often confused for severe bouts of mental illness. In fact, many religious sects will not perform exorcisms without a thorough mental health examination. And that's smart. Because if you really look at some of the stories throughout history of demons and witchcraft and all that, you can't help but really wonder, was there something going on? Or is it just someone who was sick? Unfortunately, this is going to cross a lot of boundaries for many people. Many of whom claim that ghost hunting and talks of witchcraft, many of you who think that animated cartoon characters can teach children how to summon demonic powers. Probably the same types of groups that try to say being gay is a sin and all gay people should be put to death. You claim that street magicians are possessed by demons and you will not be fooled by them in the name of God and blah, 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 blah. I'm going to tell you a little secret. Just because someone is more intelligent than you does not mean they're possessed. However, it also doesn't rule out that they might have something seriously wrong with them that grants them the know-how on how to pull off some of these things. A common argument, and one that's often not expressed enough due to concerns of discrimination, are those who claim to be mediums. Are they actually hearing spirits, or are they schizophrenic? Or are they just fraudulent altogether? We can talk about frauds and how a lot of these mainstream psychics that you see nowadays aren't the real deal. And we may even talk about a few other indiscretions I've noticed in this research. But let's stick with mental illness. And that's what we're going to do after this break. We're going to start breaking things down. And we're going to try to stray away from some of the more exotic explanations that are out there, just for the sake of keeping things simple. We'll dip into it a little bit towards the end of this program, just to try to help people determine what's going on and how to possibly prove to their loved ones that they're not going insane if that's the case. Because believe me, I've been there. So stay tuned, my friends. We'll be back here shortly.
Hey everyone, Dakota Frandsen here, specialist of the strange. I just wanted to come with you real quick about potentially doing your own podcast. Have you ever wanted to start your own podcast? Maybe you got a lot of questions like, how do I record? How do I get my show into all these apps that are out there? How can I make money? There are probably several thousand other questions about getting this show off the ground that you have been formulating and communicating in your mind. And I'm here to tell you that there is a very simple answer to this. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, distributing your show. And best of all, it is 100% free. Get all the perks from the other guys without having to pay for subscription fees And best of all, it is easy. And in fact, Anchor can match you up with sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast right now, which means you can get paid doing what you love. Isn't that the fucking dream, my friends? In fact, that's actually what I'm trying to do right now by reading this ad for you. It is amazing. It helps ease the process for guests, putting on music, whatever you want to do. So if you want to start your podcast, make some money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and several other fabulous people already using Anchor. That's Anchor FM/start. And I cannot wait to hear you on the air.
Now I can already hear some of you asking, what's the big deal? Why do we need to take mental illness into consideration? Well, as much as I hate to bundle people into statistics, the truth is, our understanding of mental illness right now, and our understanding of what makes ghosts possible, and that is a very loose thread. Just the statistics alone prove that we need to become more knowledgeable of how mental illness affects us. What are the odds of a legitimate paranormal event happening? Now, this is in regards to ghosts, demons, angels, hell, throw in UFOs. What are the chances of witnessing a legitimate event? Less than 1%. In fact, the reality is it's less than a 1% of a 1%. Well, for simplicity's sake, let's just stick to the 1%. I believe it was Grant Wilson. I really need to find what book I read this in. But I think it was Grant Wilson, known from Ghost Hunters. That said, out of like every 100 houses, only 5 might have a legitimate haunting. And key word, might. There might be something that they weren't knowledgeable about, and they might have not even thought to consider. Now this sampling is just from the United States alone, but it illustrates my point very well. The number of people who deal with any form of mental illness, it doesn't even have to be anything serious, but the number of people that experience mental illness, 20%, roughly 1 in 5 people, and that's within the United States alone. Other countries might report similar statistics. It might not even report it at all because they still believe that mental illness is caused by literal demons, spirits. And yes, I want to say something right now. It is technically possible for someone who is suffering mental illness to experience a legitimate paranormal event. In most cases, if you decide to take up investigations for yourself, if you see something like this happening, now the illness doesn't have to be anything genetic. They could be squeaky clean, have no history of drug use, aren't on any medications whatsoever, no history of mental illness. It could just simply be a matter of sleep deprivation that makes them think they're witnessing something. However, I have found, in my experience, cases where activity seems to focus on a certain person, there's usually something devious going on, but it's not anything paranormal. The term I often use to describe this phenomenon is, in order to sound more scientific and try to present it in mainstream scientific circles, I call this phenomenon post-traumatic psychosomatic manifestations. Now, there's actually two definitions that apply to this term, and they're both very valid, depending on the circumstances. However, just because there's two definitions, there's still only one solution, which I'll go into here in a little bit. And because of the situations that can often happen, there's another nickname for it. I call it Carrie syndrome, named after the Stephen King novel. Now, post-traumatic psychosomatic manifestations are the results of some form of mental ailments causing alleged paranormal activity. Well, you know what? That actually applies for both definitions. So let's go with that. Alleged paranormal activity which is actually being caused by some form of mental trauma. If your client has a history of drug use, if there's a physically abusive situation in the home, if the marriage is on the rocks, you might run into this. In fact, a few other groups have noticed that alleged poltergeist activity seems to focus on usually a female between the ages of 9 and 22, undergoing heavy amounts of stress. Some groups will try to say, oh, maybe it's a teenage girl that's all heartbroken because their boyfriend broke up with them. No. It's not. If it were that easy, I wish it was, honestly. The cases where I've had this come up, a young girl being sexually assaulted by her father, physically assaulted by her mother, turning to the occult to try to summon a demon to help her get away. A mother of two, another case I had, involved a mother of two experiencing poltergeist-like phenomenon in a relatively brand new home. At the time of the investigation, the home was only on the property for about 2 years, and there was nothing in the area that could have suggested, ancient Indian burial grounds or cliche shit like that. Within a 45-minute interview, I already solved the case. This woman was being physically assaulted by her husband. And another thing I would want to add. Oftentimes, when a partner turns abusive in certain ways, there is a strong probability that they're cheating. Or they're wanting to. They're wanting to leave. And rather just say, hey, rather just break it off like an adult, they decide to become a toxic ass person in order to drive the other person away. And unfortunately, because the other person is usually too dumbfounded or doesn't want to accept what's going on, they don't leave. And they just let that cycle of abuse continue. After my intervention, I researched the husband a bit more, found out exactly who the cheater was, and surprise, surprise, this is a common excuse a lot of guys actually use if you happen to have kids, ladies, so listen up. The woman that their father would bring in as a babysitter for the kids was the one who he was having an affair with. It's almost textbook. Now, the one thing that probably helps the most is that this woman used to be a paramedic. She saw how bad certain things can get if she let it happen. And yes, those of you who have heard some of the stories about me in the past, this is the same woman. This is the same husband and wife duo who watched a coffee mug be thrown into the husband's face when no one else was in the house. The daughters were there, off playing in the other room. They could probably throw if they needed to, but not with that type of force. I concluded that there was, in fact, spirits coming around. And they were... The most predominant one was the woman's own mother. And she was sticking around because she knew what was going on and was trying to warn her. But, even with some of my methods, that's a pretty difficult task. To which I want to explore a bit more in a future episode. But right now we're going to focus on this. For those of you who are wondering, I actually ran into this woman not too long ago. She's actually doing good. Seeing someone new. Her daughters are growing up. And they're at the point where they're starting to build their own lives. And The husband's no longer in the picture. And it seems he ran off and started a new family. So there's a bit more conflict coming their way when the kids start getting old enough to find out about each other. But that's what happens when you don't take into consideration the other people that get hurt when you start to mess around like that. And that's what also happens when you start blowing off how the kids are going to be affected because they're just dumb kids. They'll get over it. Remember that. A third case where this was prevalent was a single woman who was being visited by the child she miscarried. She thought that pagan beliefs may have stirred something up that made her become a beacon. It's like, no, it's not what it was. If you look throughout history, women who tend to turn to pagan and even with the neo-pagan rituals that are popping up nowadays, all it is a matter of self-empowerment. That's all it is. And if you look through anybody who tends to follow these types of rituals, these types of belief systems, their stories usually are pretty similar. They all came from environments where they felt weak, and they were trying to find some sort of self-empowerment. Now, the results of this investigation concluded that, nada. And the thing is with this woman, she had a history of previous drug use. It was quite visible, and it may have very well been what killed her son before he had a chance to be born. Now, that's not to say that he wasn't actually coming around and a bunch of strangers popping up may have spooked him a little. That's could have very well been what happened. We don't know enough in order to say for sure. Those are the cases that come to mind when I try to talk about these things. And it's also something I want to point out because honestly, it seems like more and more people like this are coming out of the woodwork. More and more people are getting into abusive relationships for reasons they might not even be aware of. More and more people are dealing with mental illness, and while the argument can be made that we are just being more open and honest about it, that's what's causing these numbers to spike. Unfortunately, that doesn't also seem to be the case because we have all these. We're also seeing a lot more kids we're seeing a lot more kids taking on dangerous activities. We're seeing a lot more kids getting arrested for felony crimes. And plus the media is not fucking helping. We got all these kids spooked that they think that there's going to be a school shooting. And granted, you know, it's a scary situation. It's a scary thought, but it all traced back. And despite what some people are trying to say, it all traces back to that something is going on that is mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually fucking us up. And because we have, and yes, you hear all these arguments about, ADHD being overdiagnosed in children who are supposed to be hyper, and if they don't act hyper, you should probably check in, see what's going on, because that kid might be physically sick. We have so many people taking out their own frustrations. We have parents practically try to disown their own children because they don't know how to fucking raise them. And yes, there is no handbook. And yes, there might be a legitimate situation where they had to run like hell. Every story is a little different. And because we have been so blatantly ignorant about what's all going on, and we have people who even go as far as trying to utilize law enforcement just to try to spook an abusive partner. They say, I love him. I can't live without him. Yes, these people are out there who are abusing law enforcement, who are taking these results because they themselves feel too powerless and want to seem like the big dog, and yet they're just as fucking abusive as the people putting their hands on them. Those of you who threaten with law enforcement are as much of a bunch of are just as much of a big fucking coward as the people who are putting their hands on you. And there's no reason for them to justify that. But if someone is hurting you like that, get the hell away. If you have kids with that person, take them too. Because oftentimes, a lot of agencies and a lot of lawmakers are forced to basically tie ropes around legitimate victims who do try to get away, because so many people are abusing themselves, others, and the system in order to try to be the dominant person, in order to try to come out on top. And plus, we have all these, and yes, the Me Too movement is something that obviously needed to be done for a very long time. But then at the same time, we have parents who might as well drug their children and put them in a fucking bubble for how much they react to these situations. And we have these kids who are so desperate to find a way to cover their own asses, knowing how much their parents are going to freak out, that they file falsified claims. I've been there. I've been on the receiving end of that. And quite honestly, I don't want anything to do with those people anymore. I don't want to hear anything more out of them unless one of them ends up in a grave. And that is my honest truth. But I digress. Think positive. Think positive. Woosa! Can't wait for Bad Boys 3. Yes, and I apologize for the tirade, but there's a point to all of this that I'm going to get to right after this next commercial break, so stick around. Alright. I do apologize if that little tirade of mine bothered anybody, but it's the truth. When we talk about mental illness and the occult and the paranormal, I don't want to just single out people who may legitimately be suffering from schizophrenia. I want to try to help as many people as I can. So, this is the kind of thing we have to discuss. When it comes to the human psyche, a person in general, how should I put this? No matter how similar our paths may be, we all have a unique recipe in which allows us to tread where we are. We are all a little different. And the mysteries of what happens within our own bodies is still one that many ponder. The mysteries of what happens in the cosmos itself, in existence as we know it, still carries many mysteries that we may not ever solve. But that's the voyage of exploration. That's why I say it is impossible to truly understand what is going on without walking the fields yourself. And this is why I find managers in main companies who don't get their asses out on the floor and actually try to help the people that work under them. Some of the biggest fucking morons out there. You can only see so much by looking at what's on paper. In order to truly understand what it is we call life, we have to go out and actually experience it. We can't always just sit around in our bedrooms all day, watching TV. We have to go out, interact with others. And sometimes that might be scary. Believe me, I know. And we're going to get hurt. It's probably one of the oldest teachings out there in religious philosophy. Life is suffering. It is how we adapt, how we overcome, in which defines who we are, not the actions that put us there in the first place. Someone very close to me taught me this. Someone who I honestly hope I'm just going to come out and say it. Someone who I honestly hope will become my wife one day. And if by any chance she's listening, don't count on that ever changing. Now, because of the complexity of a lot of these issues, due to the fact that a lot of cases that I take on involve abuse in some form, I've been doing my best to try to get some training on how to better handle it. Suicide awareness, I've even looked into company helping start up companies that whose goal is to try to help these people take on some of the more common situations. And unfortunately, like I said, we may not be able to fully fix all these issues. Even when we dig into paranoid schizophrenic, anything major like that, bipolar disorder, anything major like that, we may not be able to fully solve unless we, the general public, are willing to let our systems be constantly monitored by machines that are too big, too wiry, and too complex to be able to carry out our everyday lives. We may not be able to solve what happens after we die unless we find some way to record the experiences of the soul. And we first have to define what the soul actually is. And oftentimes, what a lot of people don't realize is that with certain events that might take place, even some of the most healthiest people on this earth may experience some sort of medical anomaly that they might misinterpret as something paranormal. Our minds are wired for survival. Even if you've lived the most sheltered possible experience that a person may have in this life, our minds are wired to constantly keep us on our toes, to avoid becoming lunch for something much bigger and stronger than us. And oftentimes, another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that sometimes our bodies just don't click right. Nothing necessarily wrong. It's like how some people experience sleep paralysis. And we start thinking we see things in the darkness around us. It could very well. Now, it's rare. I have seen it actually happen to where there were certain other anomalies that took place that indicated a paranormal presence, air quotes around that. But nevertheless, most cases, sleep paralysis, all it is our body turning off certain functions so we don't kick around in our sleep. And there's a whole different chain reaction that happens there that a lot of people don't realize. And sometimes certain things just don't turn off. Think of it like a series of light switches, and for some reason, somebody super glued the freaking light switch to stay on this on position. Sometimes that can happen with no logical cause. It's not that there's anything wrong with us, it's just the body just tends to freak out sometimes. And as scary as it might be, in the moment, it's nothing to really worry about. Oftentimes when things like this happens, person's usually under a lot of stress, and remove that stress, remove the problem. The same goes for post-traumatic psychosomatic manifestations. In fact, you could probably put sleep paralysis episodes under that. Once you remove the stressor that's causing some of the problem, that's causing you to go on hypervigilance and make you think that there's something around the corner all the time, those experiences might not go away. And even if you do manage to get away, you manage to fully get away from all abusive parties in your life, start completely new, and you are on the road to full-on recovery. Sometimes even the slightest indication could possibly trigger. I know that's become such a weird word. Oh, he's triggered. I know sometimes even the slightest thing can flip us into hypervigilance. Because that slight thing, it could even be something as small as the smell of someone's breath, or certain sounds that happen to sound similar to the trauma that took place beforehand. It does not take much to make our body short circuit. And that's what causes a lot of paranormal claims to be discredited. And that's why I try to tell people that we need to do more to figure out outside environmental factors that could possibly have no influence by our own interactions with the environment around us to take place. We got to find more of these anomalies and get them documented to the best of our abilities. Because none of the equipment out there that's marketed for paranormal research, that's recommended to possibly go hunting for ghosts, is actually made to do that job. It's only made to measure what's going on around you and maybe help you find the source of some sort of anomaly taking place, some sort of potential problem taking place, so that it can be fixed. And perhaps if we took more time and applied more effort to try fixing ourselves, like we try to fix broken items around us, how we try to fix a broken chair, instead of taking on the philosophy of going out and getting it replaced all the time whenever it breaks, then maybe we might start seeing a difference. If we actually take more time to actually work on what's going on than expecting everything to just be up and ready like that and have someone else take care of it, maybe we might see a change. Maybe we can start seeing all of these mental disorders slowly be eradicated. Now, if we look at situations like anti-vaxxers out there that purposely spread misinformation and get offended for being called anti-vaxxers, and well, we're going to probably see a return from people spreading misinformation. To which leads me to another point. Be more careful about who you learn from. Because there are people out there who will purposely try and lie straight to your face in order to manipulate the situation that favors them better. It's not hard. And I know some of you have actually read my books, so you know what I'm talking about. That I'm one of the last people you're probably going to expect to say this. But it's not hard to blame an unseen figure in the shadows for what goes on in our life. It's not that hard. And we make that mistake all the time. And while, yes, those monsters do in fact exist, we become almost childlike in trying to blame everything on that monster just because of, once again, the slightest trigger setting us off. Remember that. And try to invite a bit more skepticism to these claims, even ones that I'm making now. Because, who knows, the situation might change. We might find out that maybe there is some sort of grand puppet master fucking with us all the time. Makes you wonder. But that's all I have to say for today. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Tune in next week. And let's see, what should we go into? Let's expand on this a little bit. Let's dig even deeper. And let's talk about demons and mental health. Let's expand on this topic, today's topic, a little bit more next week. Because this, unfortunately, is still a very big problem in the world. And a lot of people are witnessing the end of their lives for listening to these things. So tune in next week. I'll see you there, my friends.